the struggle around housing in New York City is, of course, just an incredible situation. Just, it's an amazing thing about how much strategy one needs to even have to even think about, being able to stay in your own neighborhood, being able to move to an apartment that's accessible to you, like for if you're getting older and you don't want to live on the 6th floor, you don't have an elevated building, the rent is too high, you're in a fixed income, your family is expanding, whatever that might be, that you're no longer a student in college and you're moving out of your parents' house or a dorm and you try to find a place to live. And it can be anything from landlords taking what is a rent-stabilized apartment, and I think it's important to acknowledge that rent stabilization is an actual, rent control and rent stabilization was a struggle that workers won and fought for to be able to have permanent housing in this city and across the country, really, that some form of affordable housing, it was understood that we were not going to be priced out of this, that it would only go up in very small increments of like 2.7% with a 2-year lease, that you would only think of an increase between $20 or maybe $50 ever. And we have landlords now that are literally lying to people, new people. This is a really important thing. New young people moving into New York City are being told that an apartment that's really only, maybe $1,200 for like a 1-bedroom are being told that they need to pay $1,800, and completely lying to them. There are folks someone called me about, for instance, a trans woman who has been living in her apartment forever. Her roommate moves out. The landlord then starts a lot of anti-trans violence around her even staying in the apartment, misgendering her, calling her by her non-legal name, and when she asks about renewing her lease and she says that her boyfriend, her partner, wants to be on the lease, it's like $300 extra for the apartment that she's been living in the whole time, just to put somebody else on the lease, just to renew her lease, which is completely and totally illegal. But using everything from her gender identity, using the fact that she just wants somebody else on the lease who probably has even a better paying job than she does, $300. There are folks, there's at this point, they're actually saying that there are neighborhoods where landlords are saying that you cannot rent an apartment unless you were born outside the U.S. I'm serious. That there are people that are countering, so I can share about being displaced for 13 months and thinking that I started an organization, a community organization in my neighborhood. I was really clear that I was going to have to put a lot of energy and time into it, so I knew I wasn't going to work full time anymore. Gave up an apartment I was in for 7 years, but I had no idea that I would then encounter landlords that would not give me a housing application, that I would have to sort of think about how do I present myself, because my name is Imani Henry. And so obviously in a place like Flatbush, where it's still largely black and brown people, they don't want to rent to black and brown people. They don't want to rent to working class people. And that my name alone would then make sure that some people would not even answer my email or my phone call. Or then they meet me and refuse to give me a housing application. So this is, and I'm just one person in it. There are hundreds and thousands and millions of stories of this across the country of people talking about the fact that if you're over 65, that the landlords would do everything in their power to get you out of your apartment and not rent to you, or do everything and literally say, we're not renting to black and brown people. And again, you have to prove in a court of law that this kind of discrimination is happening. And this is where the housing movement is at right now, is doing everything in their power. I've literally talked to lawyers in housing court that the thing is to shame landlords because they have no shame. That a woman in my neighborhood told me a story of her 8-year-old and 16-year-old daughters were taken to court as illegal subletters because they have a 4-bedroom apartment and they're probably paying $1,000. And the landlord wants to take them out and has no shame to take an 8-year-old to court and say that she's illegally subletting her own bedroom. That is widespread. That is a widespread understanding. Again, there are neighborhoods that landlords are literally saying you need to be born outside the U.S., and we're not talking about you come from Bangladesh or Pakistan or or any kind of like people of color, working class. We're talking about you're rich, you have money, you have a trust fund, and that's who they're renting to. And that's who they want, not so-and-so that just, not working class immigrant folks, rich people that come from outside the U.S. So with all of this said, and I want to even say that's actually, I can quote that's East New York that's happening. East New York, Brooklyn. I'm not joking. So with all of this said, why the housing movement is in a place, and I'm incredibly proud and happy about how the response has been, not only in New York, but nationally, that people, like the slogan is, gentrification is colonialization. And the understanding that that's like a slogan throughout the housing movement. It is like the next frontier in the struggle against capitalism is around fighting gentrification, and that there is so much solidarity. So in our project, Before It's Gone, Take It Back, that we're covering and love to be able to say, like in Brixton, 2,000 people ratchet up and surrounded like a building, a landlord, and said we're going to do, like eviction support and have rallies. Like there is a whole new militancy that's happening. Like people eviction blockades. Like, yes, that's great. We're doing that, and we're going to make sure that people aren't going to. That we're going to shame these landlords to the point. So this in San Francisco, elders that are being thrown out of the mission, 200 people will show up to their house that never ever met them and stand there and put the furniture back in and get lawyers and make sure that this elder stays in their apartment. And this is happening across the country. And of course, this has happened for years. This is not a new development. It's just that it's happening widespread everywhere. And it's very exciting to see people's commitment. San Francisco last week had a whole bunch of actions around fighting gentrification, like rallies. They went to City Hall. Mass demonstrations around gentrification are happening across the country, and it's just awesome. But with that said, we are still seeing, we can talk about Washington Heights, where again, and this is why we're fighting around this is not just about, housing, it's also about small businesses. The change, when we're fighting to keep libraries open in Borough Park. We're fighting to keep, the grocery store, which it's already unfortunately happening, Clinton Hill, a supermarket that would cater to and has catered to 1,000 families, particularly people living in public housing, closed to make luxury condos. And not only just the supermarket, but the laundry mat next door. I mean, can you imagine that you can't wash your clothes and you can't buy food in your own neighborhood, and you have to walk blocks to be able to do that? And that's the other piece of it too. It's that, or the food in your neighborhood is so expensive you can't afford to eat in your own neighborhood anymore. And so these are the struggles that in Washington Heights a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, that an entire block lost their leases. All the small businesses, Latino-owned businesses in Washington Heights, the leases, they raised the rent $500, $600 on these very small mom-and-pop stores, bodegas, and the whole block changed. So these are the kind of things that we're fighting and trying to say, not only how and why we called a day that was about racism and a day about gentrification, and also want to throw out about police brutality, because we know that it's the cops that terrorize our neighborhoods. And I've talked on at length about how checkpoints are used in communities of color and working class communities. How, we talk about the broken windows, that Chasm has like an open container of beer. He does not. It's sitting over there. And I'm sitting here with Patty, and I'm getting charged for the open container that's way over there, which is true. It happens all the time. The black and brown people walking through Prospect Park are just ticketed for walking across in the park, or that barbecuing in the park, or anything in Prospect Park is now a struggle for black and brown people, working class people in that neighborhood, because as far as they're concerned, what are you doing here? Or we hear in Park Slope that black children walking down the street are followed by the cops and told to get out of this neighborhood on the loudspeaker because it's after school, and somehow black people no longer live in Park Slope. They just don't, which we know is not true. So with this said, yesterday, and I guess I'll just jump really quick because I want to wrap up, is that, Yes, back in February of this year, there had been sort of a convening of really grassroots, lefty, no-funded, groups in Brooklyn, about 12 or 13 different groups, cop watch teams, Third Ruth Community Health Center, yoga, I'd like to say the Yoga Center, along with Equality for Flatbush, Movement to Protect the People, which we all know have been Ann, who's sitting there, and want to just acknowledge Ann, and particularly as a comrade, but also I want as a Brooklyn activist. This is a really important thing. When one of the things is when your community is under struggle in such a way that at this point they're arresting you for going to your own community board meetings, that you can't even hold a sign at your own community board meeting and you get arrested. But I think it also says something when a white communist gets arrested, not only in the struggle around racism and housing, but also in solidarity with black women who are being arrested in our community. And when people it's such an interesting thing that Anne is very upset about this, so I'm just saying and publicly kind of like acknowledging this, but it was a strategic thing to put Ann out as come and support and go to pack the court for Ann Pruden, and because we knew that people in the movement would be like, Ann Pruden got arrested? Oh my God. And it circulated like wildfire that people had all these amazing accolades to talk about our comrade Ann being arrested. And Ann was pissed. She texted me day and night, and angry that the black women who got arrested, and she's shaking her head right now, she's angry, that there wasn't an acknowledgement of the black women that had also been arrested. But it was the black women who decided that they wanted to put Ann forward for strategic reasons. So I just want to acknowledge that, like, publicly. I hope she doesn't get mad at me. But I really announced that her response was, as an anti-racist activist, of like, why aren't the black women getting any play that they also were arrested? That I look at how many times Alicia Boyd has been arrested. I've only been arrested once. But the truth of the matter, it was a tactical thing, because, to be really honest, it was for the struggle. And I appreciate and thank you, Ann, for allowing yourself to be used in this way. But it was really important. So many people came out to their court hearing because particularly they were like, Ann Pruden got arrested. And folks were like, hell no, we need to get free Ann. And it was awesome. Anyway, I hope she won't hurt me later. But with this said, the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network wanted to do a solidarity action really with the situation going on in particularly Chinatown and particularly in Manhattan. We're under attack in Brooklyn, but please, let's talk about working class, low income, middle class people living in Manhattan. And a lot of our comrades in this room can talk and attest to the fact that, like, oh my goodness, do middle class, working class, low income folks live in Manhattan anymore? The Lower East Side, Harlem, Stuyvesant, Manhattan Valley. We could just start talking neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood. Washington Heights, for how much they've not only gentrified and changed, but really truthfully, just even the cultural character of the Upper West Side. Remember that it was like a progressive bastion. Think about all the rallies, all the activism, all the black bookstores, all the interracial families that grew up. That was a black, Jewish, progressive stronghold. It is actually, I don't quote me as a statistic, but they're actually saying because of gentrification, it has actually changed in its economic character and has almost surpassed the Upper East Side in wealth. The Upper West Side. And if you can just imagine how much, when I first moved to New York over 20 years ago, the Upper West Side meant something different politically and culturally and as a neighborhood than it does now, to even be compared. And you still have, again, with the police, about police brutality, you still have a large homeless community in the Upper West Side. And something that we're reacting to is the East Harlem right now, that the homeless community is under attack, and that we're organizing 4 o'clock in the morning patrols to support the homeless community that's being pushed out, brutalized, having their belongings thrown over a fence that is where luxury housing is going to be built. How disgusting is that? And there are open lots that the city owns where affordable housing could could be actually built just a block away from where they opened up this horrible little plaza of gentrification that they took all the homeless folks out of. So we're just saying, like, the city, I mean, again, picture the homeless at the forefront of the struggle, who in 2002 determined that there were over 5,000 underutilized, abandoned, hoarded lots that, and a great percentage of them city-owned, that could be places where affordable housing could be built. But instead, what we're seeing is more luxury housing. Because you know what? Rich people just, I guess they need a condo for their arm and a condom for their left arm. I mean, we're the majority. Our class is the majority. The majority of the housing should be built for us. If you want to talk about, like, just even looking at the understanding of what the need and demand is about affordable housing, because the majority of the people in the city are working class, middle to low income folk. All right, still haven't talked about the action. All right. About to do that. All right, so the bottom line is that we came together, we decided to do a solidarity action around having to do with, to show solidarity with Manhattan. And then we got really ambitious and said, you know what, let's just do citywide. Because how can you not talk about, if you want to talk about Manhattan, we have to talk about the Bronx. We have to talk about Queens. We have to talk about Staten Island. And I think outside of Queens, it was almost like every borough had a little bit of something happen yesterday. We started at 7 o'clock in the morning. We started at 7 o'clock in the morning, from 7 to 10 o'clock, and we did actions. And I want to, again, and they're bright and early at Atlantic Terminal. I was at Flatbush. Some of us were at Broadway Junction, but we did all of this flyering. And it was amazing, the response. And we made the joke, it was Happy Anti-Gentrification Day. And at Atlantic Terminal, we had Rude Mechanical Orchestra. And people were like, we have a band. So we had a band playing. We had happy, smiley people handing out flyers and stickers. And it was just amazing. Like 9, 10 people, I don't know, like, were there at Atlantic Terminal. Claudia was on her bike early in the morning, like doing these drops through Flatbush Avenue on her bike. It was just a really awesome thing. And Broadway Junction, I mean, my goodness, I just know, like, people from Bushwick all over came to do 7 o'clock in the morning distributions. Then Fury had this action, awesome action, because again, they're hoarding and privatizing public housing. I mean, how despicable is this? That public housing is no longer, that literally taking away people's parking lots, hoarding actual apartments so people cannot move. They're saying that there's no availability. You had another child and you want to move to a 3-bedroom, there's no apartments. But the apartments are laying dormant and no one has access to them. And people are saying, well, why can't? I've been in a 2-bedroom apartment, my family is grown, I want a 3-bedroom. Oh, well, nothing's available. And I could go, they're selling off. One of our demands is hands off public land. Don't sell off public housing to developers. It's just the most despicable thing. So there was an action at a NYCHA management company house by residents in the Farragut houses, and then later in the night, I'll talk later tonight, the Wycliffe houses right by Barclays all came down, and it was really important. I mean, like, folks came in scooters. I mean, folks came, like older folks, with various forms of mobility came to the demonstration and really wanted to point out the fact that we're still here in downtown Brooklyn. You can have Barclays, you can have all that you want to, but yet there are black and brown working class people, elders, people living in public housing. That has been the history and majority of people living in downtown Brooklyn. And this is an important acknowledgement of this. So then, last but not least, we then had a press conference at City Hall. And I want to just say that we decided that we would do this. It was just symbolic to do it on OWS, which of course there was stuff at Zuccotti Park, people were arrested, tried and coordinated with them as best as we could to have sort of like these to do things jointly. They also went to City Hall, all different kinds of things happened. The level of police presence, until we got to City Hall, we didn't know. Like, they had just painted this brush and just sort of said, like, it's OWS. So there was a boycott of the press yesterday. This is very important to sort of acknowledge. There was, like, sort of a boycott of the press. Like, to our knowledge, there was not the same news frenzy happening in the same way as that we've seen in other years. I think definitely wanting to make sure that the movement felt like this had died down. They were like, stop. I mean, I think a lot of people have talked about that. It's just like independent press, yes, but like mainstream press, absolutely not. All over the place. They were like, what, you're still having anniversaries? Damn you. But they ratcheted up the cops. It was incredible. So at City Hall, it was sort of like we were there, it was gentrification. It was amazing. You name a borough represented. Manhattan, Queens, you know, folks from El Barrio talking about development coming up and how dangerous it is that this brother talked about losing his cat. Because the streets had just become so that his cat used to be able to roam around freely was killed because of the level of construction and the level of like sort of the over sort of population of how the neighborhood had changed, that his cat couldn't roam around anymore. Broke down over his older brother about the losing of his cat. It's just his neighborhood has changed, right? People coming, and so we had this amazing, very grassroots like anti-gentrification press conference. Then we went to city planning where all the rezoning issues are. Like again, if you want to talk about again, if people know, like your community board is appointed by the borough president. If your borough president is pro-gentrification, which they all are, then you have people that are talking about, again, this superimposing of the rezoning struggle that everyone is like, and if everyone understands what the rezoning struggle is really about is upzoning happens to working class, black and brown neighborhoods all the time. Upzoning basically means that you can scale higher, you can build a hotel, you can build luxury apartments, you can do whatever you want to, because we're gonna upzone it, right? And then more residential, it's making it more commercial. Downzoning happens to the neighborhood that de Blasio lives in Park Slope. So a more affluent neighborhood then becomes downzones. And we said, no, we can't build any further. There'll be no skyscrapers here. And no commercial. Mom and pop stores are fine, but you can't have some big and vast here. That's not gonna happen. And that's the piece of what's happening with that, the understanding of rezoning. And historically, and like we've done all these studies on it, it's black and brown, working class neighborhoods are upzoned, and more affluent white neighborhoods are downzoned. So it's really, the rezoning is about racism. So with this said, there was an action there, and then finally we had an action at the edge of Chinatown, Manhattan Bridge, and marched over to Barclays. It was a police festival of all kinds. They had carnival rides. I mean, I'm joking. It was just, the cops came with zip ties for housing activists. They came with a lard machine. Like I'm saying, you came with a lard machine for grandmothers talking about defending their right to rate-stabilized housing. There were older women with they had brought their own chairs to sit down, and you had a lard machine for that. The lard machine is it's the weapon of sound that they use against protesters. And they brought that out for women who had brought their own chairs to sit through a rally. And we just kept juxtaposing that. Because when they talk about community policing, they are so out of touch with what the understanding of a community is, because all they see are black and brown and working class bodies, and they think about murdering them. That's it. So that any kind of, when they even use that code of community policing, it's all bullshit. Because they just want to beat the hell out of us. That they came ready in a military complete, we had 5 white shirts. I want to say this, there's a hipster cop from OWS, was at all of our demonstrations. I wanted to say all the anarchist forces were like, oh my God, this is amazing. I haven't seen this cop since 4 years. You have 17 white shirts here, I'm not joking. We had the rapid response team. We had it was a military zone. We were under 200 protesters, and it was 1,000 cops to 200 people. And I'm not joking. I wish I was exaggerating. It was ridiculous. And it was all permitted. And so then when we walked on our little, on the footbridge, right? So there were already cops hanging out like this, waiting for us on the footbridge to go to Manhattan. Literally, you kept seeing them pop up and down. It was hysterical because we had a permit. And exactly, whack-a-mole. And it was just so interesting that they were there, right? And then they followed us. They followed us in cars. They followed us on foot, and people just kept documenting this because it was just like a spirited marching and then like a whole cop parade behind us. It was amazing. All the way into Manhattan. We were on the sidewalk the whole time. Nobody tried to take the streets again. No, this is not what we came to do, but this was their understanding. It kind of bolstered us in some ways. It made us more resolved. We made people, if you weren't clear about police brutality before, you were clear now. And then we had an amazing spirited rally at people, again, white cloth houses. Folks were already there at Barclays. It was awesome at Barclays. Amazing wrap up to the day. And I also want to say, badass stuff happened in Staten Island. I hope Shirley will talk about, Sister Shirley will talk about it, that there was a softball game that Bratton and other forces were at that they disrupted at Staten Island. That we didn't put out, like, you know, in like the public. Yes, a round of applause for this. But the city council and other folks were like, oh, we're going to play softball. And activists said, oh, no, you won't. And so folks were there to meet them and disrupt them, which was awesome. So anyway, the next meeting here, and I want to thank comrades and, you know, the other comrades that have come out, Ruben, other folks that, you know, have been coming to our meetings. I want to encourage folks, come October 1st is the next band meeting. It's an awesome meeting. We definitely want to also, like, you know, largely a lot of LGBTQ youth, this whole building endorse, and we're all there and enforce, led chants, we're there, and our political leadership, but also like the really truthfully a mix of like, which is very, that you see young people, older people, black people, Latino people, white people, all kinds of folks together that are not all just part of the, what we think of as a housing movement. It is the anti-police brutality movement. It is the housing movement, but grassroots. Like, we're not talking about politicians. We're talking about how do we stop gentrification and not sort of like, oh, you know, development is kind of okay. No, none of it. We say preservation of affordable housing over development, and not playing any games about this, like somehow that we think and believe that the ruling class is going to somehow give us affordable housing. That's not what's happening, and we want to shut that down completely. Anyway, October 1st, 6:30 here in this office, encouraging people to go. I have been over my time. I apologize. Thank you, comrades and friends. Please help to support the struggle that's going on in here in New York. And if there is a struggle that's going on in your neighborhood, in your community, please let us know. We need to shame these landlords. We would love to put that on blast. Please don't be shy about it. Let's give them hell. Thank you, comrades.